Daniel and Revelation in the 21st century, episode 14, 144,000 Cohanim. Today, we want to consider the first half of Revelation chapter 7, which looks at the 144,000 who have been called to be Cohanim of God and for the Lamb. Last Shabbat, we looked at the kaleidoscope and how, when you turn the tube, the coloured glass pieces make up different patterns. So also, Yochanan, when he received his visions in the court of heaven, saw many changing visions that were generated by the various entities that he saw in the throne room. Chapter 7 is no exception, because the chapter looks at two distinctly different groups of people who are being seen in two separate visions. Firstly, we have the sealing of the 144,000. Then if we turn the kaleidoscope slightly, the scene changes to reveal the great crowd of people from all the nations standing in front of the central throne. But today, I want to wind that kaleidoscope back just one notch and focus on the first half of chapter 7 and look at the 144,000. So who are they and where did they come from? The answer is given for us in the first 4 verses of that chapter, where we're told, "After this I saw 4 angels standing at the 4 corners of the earth, holding back the 4 winds of the earth, so that no wind would blow on the land, on the sea, or any tree. I saw another angel coming up from the east with the seal of the living God, and he shouted to the 4 angels who had been given the power to harm the land and the sea, 'Don't harm the land or the sea or the trees until we have sealed the servants of our God in their foreheads.' I heard how many were to be sealed, 144,000, taken from every tribe of the people of Israel." Then when we move over to Revelation chapter 14 verse 4, that one verse can be broken up into 7 separate and distinct attributes that reveal the 144,000 as a unique breed of people. So let's take some time to look at those 7 attributes as explained by Yochanan. Firstly, they are taken from every tribe and people of Israel. They are the ones who have not defiled themselves with women. They are virgins. They follow the Lamb wherever he goes. They have been ransomed from amongst all humanity, as firstfruits for God and for the Lamb. And on their lips no lie was found. They are without defect. These are certainly unique attributes that are not normally found among human beings. So I want to dive a little more deeply into each of those 7 attributes and see how they compare with the narrative of the rest of Scripture. Now, that first attribute says that they are from every tribe of the people of Israel. That is the only attribute that actually is mentioned in chapter 7. The other 6 come from chapter 14. So looking at the tribes listed in that chapter, in chapter 7, we see the order of the names there does not match the birth order of the natural sons of Yaakov, or Jacob. Nor does it match the list of tribes that were actually registered by Moshe at Mount Horeb, or Sinai. Or even the list of tribes that we've just read about in Ezekiel chapter 48. All the names are there, but they're all rearranged. The tribes named in Revelation chapter 7 is a unique list that relates entirely to their calling, which is that, of course, to be Cohanim during the 1,000-year reign of Yeshua. Because they are to be Cohanim, or priests for God, and the Lamb, they are said to be holy for God, which matches up with what we read in Shemot, Exodus, chapter 28, verse 36, where it says, "Set apart for Yahweh." In that situation, Moshe was giving instructions regarding the garments that would be worn by the Levitical Cohanim. So we see that the role of the 144,000 is very similar to that was given to Aaron and his 4 sons. Now the second attribute says they are the ones who have not defiled themselves with women. They are virgins. Now that phrase implies that they remained celibate throughout their natural earthly lives. However, that is contrary to what Yahweh wanted of his Levitical Cohanim, who were all required to marry and have children. Even Kepha, Peter, the one to whom Yeshua gave the keys to the kingdom, is spoken about more than once as being married. So we can see from that it is not the worldly understanding of celibacy that is actually being considered, but rather it is being considered on a spiritual level. They were virgins who had not corrupted themselves with the woman spoken about later in Revelation that is said to ride the beast. That moves us on to the third attribute, which states that they follow the Lamb wherever he goes, which means those who have the calling from the Ruach HaKodesh have separated themselves from the rest of Israel and, of course, from the world, and become a set-apart part of the set-apart people. That is to say, they are holy, set-apart, or set-apart group within the structure of Israel as a national body. They are no longer considered as being part of the 12 individual tribes. Shaul confirms that line of reasoning in 1 Corinthians chapter 7, verse 19, where he says, being circumcised means nothing, and being uncircumcised means nothing. What does mean something is keeping God's commandments. But what does it mean to keep God's commandments? After all, one command in the Torah, of course, is to be circumcised. For that answer, we need to look to the words of Yeshua, where he himself said in Matthew chapter 5, verse 18, indeed I tell you that until heaven and earth pass away, not so much as a yud or a stroke will pass from the Torah, not until everything that must happen has happened. Here, clearly, he says that the Torah has not been done away with in this age, and nor will it even be done away with in the age to come. So how is Shaul speaking the way he does about circumcision? If someone is to be counted among the future Cohanim, he must be willing to observe Torah and to follow what Yeshua taught his original 12 Talmudim. That is, follow the Lamb wherever he goes. Okay, let's unpack it. 1, it means that we must acknowledge acknowledge Yeshua by his God-given name, which is Yeshua, not the replacement name that has been adopted by Christianity. 2, we call God of Israel by the name Moshe was told, Yud-He Vav-He, not some other man-made title. The third point, we must observe all 7 appointed Moedim, or appointed times, as called for by Yahweh in Vayikra, Leviticus chapter 23. Not any other man-made festivals that are not of scriptural origin. Fourthly, we must keep the Shabbat on the 7th day of the week, as it was given to Israel, and not replace it with Sunday, which is the first day of the week. The 5th point, we need to acknowledge that Yeshua died on the 14th day of Aviv in 30 CE, and that he rose on the Shabbat afternoon. He did not die on Friday and rise on Sunday morning. The 6th point we have to acknowledge is that he ascended to the presence of his Father on the 18th day of Aviv, that is Bikurim, the day of first fruits, and that he was given all authority in heaven and on earth that particular day. And finally, the seventh thing we need to consider is we must never follow the Christian teaching that the law, or Torah, has now been replaced with grace. Those 7 requirements that must be fulfilled as we await the upward call. Only by observing these 7 things can we hope to follow the Lamb wherever he goes. So that moves us on to the 4th attribute, which states that they have been ransomed from among humanity. So what do those words mean? The tribe of Yehudah was dispersed throughout the Western world for nearly 1900 years after the destruction of the Second Temple. But I want to put that matter aside for now, and we'll consider it after we've considered those last 3 attributes. So looking at the 5th attribute, where the 144,000 are seen as first fruits for God and the Lamb. So what does that mean to be of the first fruits? When it relates to human beings, we see for the first time the term was used by Yaakov in his blessing over his sons, where he says in Bereshit, or Genesis, chapter 49, verse 3, Reuben, you are my firstborn, my strength, the firstfruits of my manhood. The next usage is in Devarim, Deuteronomy, chapter 21, verse 17, where Moshe is speaking about a man who has 2 wives and says he must acknowledge the firstborn son of his unloved wife, giving him the double portion of everything he owns, for he is the first fruits of his manhood, and he has the right of the firstborn. Then in Psalms, Yahweh twice reflects back to the night before Israel left Egypt, saying, by striking all the firstborn in Egypt, the first fruits of their strength and the tents of Ham were destroyed. Turning now to the Brit Hadashah, we see there that there are 7 references relating to human first fruits, with perhaps the clearest example being found in Romans chapter 8 verses 22 and 23, where Shaul speaks about all those who have been chosen in this lifetime by saying, we know that until now the whole creation has been groaning, as with the pains of childbirth, and not only it, but we ourselves, who have the first fruits of the Spirit, groan inwardly as we continue waiting eagerly to be made sons of God. That is, to have our whole bodies redeemed and set free. Then Shaul also speaks about Yeshua in the same manner in 1 Corinthians 15:20, where he says, the fact is that the Messiah has been raised from the dead, the first fruits of all those who have died. Finally, in 2 Thessalonians chapter 2 verse 13, Shaul clarifies the difference between the application in the Tanakh, where the human first fruits are considered as being the first fruits of manhood. Shaul then speaks about the first fruits in the Brit Hadashah as being in terms of the Spirit, where he is referring to the actions of the Ruach HaKodesh. Just like Yeshua, if we have the attributes of being first fruits, we must also be spiritually reborn through the Ruach HaKodesh. Even though Yeshua was begotten by the Spirit, he had to become the first fruits from the dead. In the same way, as the 144,000, we will also become first fruits through having part in that first resurrection. That we will become first fruits of the Spirit is confirmed, Shaul said in 2 Thessalonians 2 verse 13. But we have to keep thanking God for you always, brothers, for the Master's love, because God chose you as first fruits for deliverance by giving you the holiness that has originated in the Spirit and the faithfulness that has origin in the truth. Now that brings us on to the sixth attribute. On their lips no lie was found. Is there any man, woman, or child who has ever lived on planet Earth who has never told a lie? The answer must surely be no. So, well, what then can this attribute be considering? If we turn again to Shaul, I believe he gives us the answer in 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, verses 9 through 12, where he lays forth a deeper understanding of the lie by saying, when this man who avoids Torah comes, the adversary will give him the power to work all kinds of false miracles, signs and wonders. He will enable him to deceive in all kinds of wicked ways those who are headed for destruction because they would not receive the love of the truth. This is why God is causing them to go astray, so that they will believe the lie. The result will be that they will have not believed in the truth, but have taken their pleasure in wickedness and will be condemned. In that same chapter, Shaul warned that those who were listening to him and believing his words, he said these things in verses 3 and 4. For the day of the Lord will not come until the apostasy has come, and the man who separates himself from Torah will be revealed, and he is on his way to destruction. He will oppose himself to everything that people call good or make an object of worship. He will put himself above them all, and he will sit in the temple of God and proclaim that he himself is God. So from those words we can see Shaul is not talking about the day-to-day human falsehood and lies, but rather he is speaking about the institutional teachings that the law or the Torah has been replaced by grace, and all that goes along with that blatant lie. That brings us to the seventh and final attribute. They are without defect. Like the previous attribute, we need to dig below the surface of everyday life to see what Yochanan really meant in those words. Once again, those words must be measured against the teachings of Tanakh so that we can see what it really means to be without defect. Starting on the day before Israel departed from Egypt, Moshe was told how they were to prepare for that first Pesach by saying, your animal must be without defect, a male in its first year, and you must choose it from either the sheep or the goats. That requirement continued right through the Torah in relationship to the type of animal that could be offered as a sacrifice before Yahweh. In the same way, when we turn to the Brit Hadashah, we find in 1 Peter 1, verses 18 and 19, in relationship to Yeshua, he says, you should be aware that the ransom paid to free you from the worthless way of life that your fathers passed on to you, did not consist of anything perishable like silver and gold. On the contrary, it was the costly, bloody sacrificial death of the Messiah as the Lamb without defect and spot that paid your ransom. Once again, we can see through the words of Shaul that on these matters, he says in Ephesians chapter 1, verse 3 and 4, praised be Yahweh, Father of our Master Yeshua the Messiah, who through the Mashiach has blessed us with every spiritual blessing from heaven. In the Messiah, he chose us in love before the creation of the universe to be holy and without defect in his presence. So the end of the 7 attributes that define what it means to be part of the 144,000 gives us a better understanding of the depth and significance of that calling. Now, turning back to that fourth attribute that I said I was going to hold, 144,000 have been ransomed from among humanity. I asked, what does that mean? Assuming for a moment that the 144,000 members of the body have been exclusively from the 12 tribes of Israel, then there would be no place at all for the inclusion of Gentiles among that number. But when we consider that not long after the Ruach HaKodesh came down upon the faithful ones who were gathered at Shavuot in 30 CE, we read in Acts chapter 10 that Cornelius, a Roman centurion, and many other righteous Goyim, or Gentiles, after him were grafted into the Messianic community of the first century. So did they become proselyte Jews through circumcision and adoption into the only remaining tribe of Israel, which of course at that stage was Yehudah. There is no suggestion that Cornelius or any of the males in his household were circumcised. What's more, there is no way that a Roman centurion could have become a proselyte Jew in that society. So what are we seeing here? And also bearing in mind that in that stage of history, the 10 tribes of Israel had gone into exile in 721 BCE, and Benjamin had merged into the tribe of Yehudah. So turning yet again to Shaul, we need to consider again his words in 1 Corinthians 7:19, where he said, being circumcised means nothing. Being uncircumcised means nothing. But what does mean something is keeping God's commandments. If one is going to observe Torah, one must have all males born into any of the tribes of Israel circumcised on the 8th day. So what is Shaul trying to say? It appears he is saying that if you're called by the Ruach to have part in the Messianic community, it does not matter whether you are circumcised or not. So that must mean that you will no longer be considered as being part of the 12 tribes of Israel. Even if you were born into one of those tribes, it doesn't matter. But what about the Gentiles like Cornelius? That sounds a really radical statement. But if you think deeply about those words, we find that Shaul is making a very profound statement that has been largely ignored or misunderstood right down through the centuries to this day. What I believe Shaul is actually saying is confirmed in what he said in the verses immediately before that. 1 Corinthians 17 and 18, he said, let each person live the life the Master, Yeshua, had assigned him, and live in the condition that he was when he was called by God. This is the rule I lay down in all kehilot, or congregations. Was someone already circumcised when he was called? Then he should not try to remove the mark of circumcision. Was he uncircumcised when he was called? He shouldn't undergo brit milah, or circumcision. Again, in Ephesians chapter 2, verses 11 through 22, we find the climax to this whole apparent mystery when Shaul drives home what is meant to be called into the first century Messianic community. In those verses, Shaul clearly speaking to the faithful Gentiles who were in his midst when he says, remember your former state, you Gentiles by birth, called the uncircumcised by those who were merely because of an operation on their flesh were called the circumcised. At that time you had no Messiah. You were estranged from the national life of Israel. You were foreigners to the covenant embodying God's promises. You were in this world without hope and without God. But now you who were far off have been brought near through the shedding of the Messiah's blood. For he is our salvation and our shalom. He has made us both one, and has broken down the wall of partition which divided us, by destroying in his own body the enmity that was occasioned through the Torah. But he did this in order to create union with himself from two groups, in becoming a single, one new humanity, by his being executed on a stake as a criminal, and thus he himself killed that enmity that stood between the Torah and the Gentiles. Also, when he came, he announced as good news the shalom to you and who are far off, and shalom to those who are nearby. News that through him we have both had access to the Spirit of the Father. So you are no longer foreigners and strangers. On the contrary, you are fellow citizens with God's people and members of God's family. You have been built on the foundation of the emissaries and the prophets, with the cornerstone being Yeshua himself. In union with him, the whole building is held together, and it's growing into a holy temple in union with the Master. Yes, in union with him, you yourselves are being built together into a spiritual dwelling place for God. Amen. In just under 300 words, Shaul had summed up what it meant in his day to be called Talmidim of Yeshua. Even now, in the 21st century, that same promise is still held out to all who are being called by the Ruach HaKodesh. So that brings us back to what it meant to be called and set apart in the first resurrection. As we're told about in Revelation chapter 20, verse 6, blessed and holy is anyone who has part in the first resurrection. Over him the second death has no power. On the contrary, they will be Cohanim of God and of the Messiah, and they will rule with him for 1,000 years. So it has been a long and challenging pathway to understand what it means to be part of the 144,000. All this is why we should aspire towards being Talmidim of Yeshua. If we've been called by the Ruach HaKodesh, if we are called even in this now 21st century, we have the promise that along with our brothers in Yeshua, we will all be caught up into heaven, just like the souls of the ones who died before cried out to Yeshua at the time of the opening of the fifth seal. As Shaul said in Ephesians chapter 2 verse 15, I will paraphrase his words, he, Yeshua, created in union with himself from both Jew and Gentile a single new humanity, and thus brings shalom within the body. So on that encouraging note, Shabbat Shalom.